Hello, so I'm going to do a little drawing tutorial today of, from a photograph, which is, I'm going to use this photo of a dancer, which I found on Instagram, and do a little tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead, I have a different setup today. I think it's going to work better, so that I can put the computer over my desk. So as usual, I work with a sheet of paper that's coated with pastel powder. And I'm going to be using a brown charcoal pencil and a regular pencil. So if you have like a desire for a particular technique, I could work on watercolor or do a different kind of figure or whatever, hands, portraits, let me know. So I have my photo in my drawing. Let me turn the angle a little bit more. There. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is kind of lay out a basic for the figure. So it's going to be kind of like a little stick drawing almost, where I am kind of laying out the proportions. So I'm going to use a folded sheet of paper to help me take measurements and make sure that I'm doing the figure right. So in this case, I think I'm going to use this area as the length for my measurement. So if I do that, I go 1. So that's 1 head length long. So this would be the exact same thing I would be doing if I was working with a real model. Like I would measure with my thumb what their proportions are. So I go 1, 2, and that leaves me just below his shoulder area. 3, that leaves me just above his butt, and 4. Above his, towards the area of his feet. And then if I go down, that takes me to just below his hands. So I'm going to keep that in mind when I'm working on my drawing. So like if this is going to be his head, like his hair area, so I can take that measurement, which is basically, I'm kind of reproducing the same scale as the photo. 1, 2, 3, 4. So his feet are going to be just above, floating up here somewhere. And let's see here. And then if I go down, this is going to be below the level of his hand. So that's helping me to like kind of know that I have him well placed on my page. So so now I'm going to go ahead, and I feel comfortable about the proportions that my figure has, and I'm going to go in and lay out the space he's taking up. My desk is really hard, so I'm going to put some sheets of paper underneath to help soften it, and it'll just make my line quality smoother. So I'm going to go ahead and, okay, so let's see here. That was 2, 3, 2, 3. So his butt is right around here. Okay, so if I take my pencil and go straight up and down, that's going to take me just to the outside of his head. So let me go ahead and do that. So if the outside of his head is here, the middle of his butt is right around there. So that's going to be that. Okay, I'm going to take a measurement of how wide his waist is too. Oh, it's exactly 1 head. So if this is the middle right here, his waist is approximately here. There. So like his waist is narrower than I had imagined. So it's going to be about right there. This is going to come out. See, I was drawing his shoulders too wide based on the measurement I just took. There. So I'm starting to like get a little bit of a feeling for let's see here, let me rearrange that. So I'm starting to get a little bit of a feeling for how his body is going to be arranged on this sheet of paper. At the moment, all I'm really doing is making this map. Like I want to know approximately where things are going to be on the page. There. So I feel like I'm getting pretty comfortable with my approximate layout of what's going on with his body. Let's see. So this point right here on his shoulder blade is even with his ear. So if I've decided that his ear is going to be right around here, this is the line of his shoulder right here, right about here is going to be where that shoulder blade is coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and at this point, I think I'm going to start committing to different lines. Like I'm still not doing it totally. I'm drawing, if you notice, I'm drawing mostly with the side of my pencil and I'm drawing very lightly. Like I'm not really ready to draw lines that are that committed and hard. But that's something that you do as you go along. Like, you know, at a later point, it's when I'm going to want to like really commit. But for now, it's like you start with these like really rough lines that can be totally wrong. Like it's fine for it to be totally wrong. And but then as you go, you start taking measurements. You start like thinking about where you think that the lines should be, and then committing little by little. So that's the stage where I'm at now. There. So it's starting to look pretty good. The middle of his back is right here. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and commit to this area, I think. So the point of his wrist right here is just a little bit past his ear. So when I was drawing it just now, I had put it too close. So it needs to be further out, that point, like right around there. His hand is going to be right here. Okay, so when drawing hands, what I do is I draw this shape right here and then this shape right here. So it's like I just simplify it. It's like this is a shape right there. It's like a trapezoid. I would draw the thumb as one shape and this is another shape. And then I worry about the fingers individually inside. So that's the way I'm going to be drawing his hand right now, is I'm drawing this kind of a diamond shape for his hand. So his wrist is somewhere behind his ear, so it's right around there. His fingers are coming straight out like that. His wrist is going to come straight out. So I had already drawn it a little bit too far down. So I'm going to have it going down like that. Okay, so that's starting to look pretty good. So I'm going to start thinking about, okay, I'm going to color this in because I'm pretty committed to that being his head shape. So I think that I was wrong. This curve is different. So I'm going to pull that in a little bit and give him more of a curve right there so that it matches more like what's going on in the original. Okay, so I want to kind of finish this head area. So I'm going to go ahead and really start committing. So I'm going to start putting in the lines of his fingers, which are inside of the shape that he already has indicated, right there. I'm going to draw a hard line for the underside of his hand, which I've decided to commit to. So I almost don't use eraser when I draw. The way I draw is like really fine lines, and then I work my way out. So it's like if you look at it from up close, you can see that like I'm just drawing these really delicate lines, like this line right here on his arm, for example, which it was wrong. Like his arm wasn't there, but it doesn't matter. It's really finely drawn, so I just leave it there because by the time I darken everything that's around it, it's going to kind of disappear. And it is on the light side, so I may erase just a touch of it towards the end. But it's not so much to erase the line; it's more to put in the light. But the way to draw, like in my opinion, is to work from really light to darker as you go, and that's going to help you to like slowly like feel your way through the drawing. So it's like I knew that his arm was right there, but as I'm going with these lines on top, I'm sort of refining what was going on. So at this point, this hand is basically committed. I've drawn it. So now I'm going to go ahead and start thinking about the shadows. So shadows you draw them the same way you draw the outlines. It's like I'm going to draw the outline of this, like this arm. There's a line right there that goes around the edge of the shadow. So that's what I'm going to draw when I'm working on his arm right here. It's like there's a line that carries the shadow to his wrist, then it twists around his wrist, goes underneath his palm, and goes underneath that finger. And then with the side of my pencil, I'm going to fill that in with shadow. There. So now with the tip of my pencil, I'm going to put lines, like crosshatch lines, and indicate the shadow core. Okay, and now because his hand is darker, like right there, along, like it's the light is catching on this part of his the back of his hand, his wrist or whatever, and then the light is really bright right here, but this part of his hand is in shadow. So I'm going to indicate that with a very light. I'm just going to throw in a little bit of shadow right there on his fingers. So now with my kneaded eraser, although you could do this if you have a blue or gray paper or something like that, you would just use like a white Conte crayon or pastel. I'm going to come in and erase out the pastel that I had put here earlier to indicate the light on his arm. So this whole side of his hand, I'm going to erase a little bit. So like if I was going to do a drawing that was going to take hours to finish, that was a much more finished drawing, I might not be erasing here at all, because if you notice, like this is white on the edge of the paper, that is not white. That is like it's a mid-tone, really. It's like even on like the brightest areas of his body, on his shoulder, right here on his rear end, it's like that's not white. It's like it's a light tone, but it's not white. This is white. So if I was going to make this drawing where I was going to take like several hours and do it really perfect, I probably wouldn't be erasing, because this paper is is similar in tone to his light side. But because I'm doing this drawing quickly, I don't want to do a really like long-term drawing. I'm going to go ahead and exaggerate the lights and darks and erase them. So I'm doing it delicately so that I can, because I'm going to put a little, so I have white pastel, and I'm going to put the white pastel to catch I want to just indicate the brightest highlight running down this arm. And on the top of his hand, and I'm going to put just a couple little spots indicating his wrists. And then with the black, I am going to draw a little bit underneath his arm to catch that dark shadow that's underneath where his hand disappears. So, and then I'm going to go ahead and put in a little bit of shadow where his hand is running over the edge of that sofa or the chair he's sitting in. And I'm going to put a touch of black over the shadow on his arm. Just a touch. Okay, so that arm is looking pretty good. So now I'm going to paint his hair. Okay, so I'm kind of outlining his arm a little bit just so that I'm sure that that's exactly where I want it to be. I'm going to erase his ear. And I'm going to draw just a little touch with the edge of my pencil on top of the brown that I had already put there. And then with the side of my pencil, the same way I had done the brown earlier, I'm going to fill it in with black. There. So that's just getting like the most basic like map of what's going on in this part of his figure. So because I'm working with a photo, and it kind of flattens things. Like if it was real life, it would look different. I'm going to assume that it's actually darker, like on this side of his head, and lighter on this side of his head where the light's picking it up. The photo flattened it, but when I draw it, I don't want to flatten it. I'm going to make assumptions about light and dark based on the way I've experienced light acting, as an artist. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that kind of line around the edge of his hair, and I'm going to darken that in a lot more. Okay, so now I'm going to come back in and kind of like give him a little bit of hair texture. So the original does not have this, and it's always kind of tricky to invent when you can't see it. That's why I don't like drawing from photos. It's like, or one of the reasons. It's always better to draw from a live model if this is the kind of effect you're going for, whenever possible. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm kind of like pulling in a little bit of texture. So if like the top point of his head is here, so the hair would be moving out away from it in every direction. So I don't just draw lines in whatever random way. I'm drawing the lines, these texture lines, in the same direction that his hair would flow, or at least that I imagine it would flow. If the model was posing in person, then I would be able to see that really clearly, but obviously I can't. So okay, there. So this is that area is essentially more or less finished. So now I'm going to use that as like I can't really change that. That's like set. So based on that, I'm going to make sure that everything else in my drawing is going to be accurate. So at this point, I think I'm ready to work on his shoulders and finish this arm. So there's this line of his shoulder that rides up from his ear. So I'm going to kind of indicate that. And I think what I'm going to do right now is sort of like indicate, I'm going to start thinking about the outlines of his arm and shoulders. So, okay, so the first thing I think I'm going to do about this is measure. So from his ear to the outside of his finger, I'm going to put a mark on my paper. So like I said, if I was drawing a live model, I would be doing the exact same thing. I would just be measuring them with my thumb on my pencil. And then I'm going to measure that against his head. So, or I'm going to look for, actually, so this is perfect. So then I look for different places so that I know how long that is. So the distance from his ear to the outside of his hand is the same as the distance from the tip of his finger to the end of his hair. So I'm going to do that on my paper. So the distance from here to here is the same as the distance from here to there. So now I know that I was indicating it too short. That's the real point on the outside of his fingers, but I was indicating it here. So that's helping me to measure. I do that all constantly as I'm drawing. I measure and measure. I take tons of measurements. So that's going to help me as I start indicating his arm. So like this is his shoulder. His hand is like right here. His thumb, his finger is going to come up right there. So this needs to stay approximately, where that is. And that's where that point is. So the arm, this is the outside of the sofa. His arm comes out like this and around. Okay, so and I also want to I'm going to lay my finger on top of his arm from this point on his shoulder along the top of his arm. And it's essentially a straight line. So I'm going to keep that angle in mind. Okay, so the shoulder, there's a muscle here that's turning a circle. So I'm going to keep that in mind. That is coming over. So I like to do lots of overlapping lines. It's like there's a muscle. You can see the highlights right here, where the shoulder is coming over above his shoulder, and then the back of his shoulder blade, it's coming right here. This is all a muscle that's on top. So when I draw it, I'm going to overlap these lines right there. So so that's what I'm doing with indicating these lines right here on his back. And I think for now that's good. This arm is indicated. It looks a little thick to me. I'm going to measure that. Let's see. So it's about the same width if I measure from the widest point on his shoulder to his ear to his hand, just a little bit less than that. So if I take that measurement, yeah, it's a little too wide. I drew it a little bit too wide. So I'm going to lower that. This whole thing needed to come down. That means that this shoulder is going to be like right there. And that's good. Yeah, that's better. It looks a little less overdeveloped. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing. So if you notice, like I'm starting to make these lines darker, but they're still not as dark as they could go. I'm keeping the lines relative. It's like a mid-tone line. So I'm going to go ahead and start laying out the other arm. So his arms are quite thick. So I think that the arm is probably right about here. His shoulder comes out like this. His arm comes out like this. The place where his shoulder meets his back, there's like a wrinkle in the skin that comes out like that. And then I'm going to draw the outside of this arm, which I think I was more or less right to begin with. That goes right there. Goes right there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So far, that's the the layout of his back. So I'm going to lay out a little bit more of his body before I commit fully to shading his back, I think. So I think I was more or less right earlier. I think that his back needs to come in a little bit because he has quite a small waist. So I'm going to draw that in a little bit further. This is going to come in like this. It's going to wrap around where his legs come in. That's going to come in like that. Okay, his back is here. This is here. Okay, so the shadow on his rear meets here like that. Draw that up a little bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to commit myself and go ahead and finish his shoulder area. So let's see. Okay, so I'm going to start with his shoulder since I had already done that arm. And I'm going to do the same thing I've done before and draw the outline of the shadow. So let's see. Come out like this. I'm literally drawing a line where that shadow is. Okay, and there's a shadow that's really deep right there too, triangular space. So because I'm using a photo, if I was working from a real model, it's a lot easier to see things. So like I would also draw this negative shape. In the photo, it's really hard to make out because it kind of blurs with the background. But at this point, this is when I'm really committing, is when I put in the black. So I'm putting in this, my pencil's not sharp enough. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and commit to this line that's running around the edge of the figure. And I'm going to put in the shadow that's lying underneath. Okay, and because this shadow is quite dark, I'm going to go over it with the same, the side of my pencil just to darken it a little bit and make it feel like it's moving into that shadow. Okay, I'm going to draw with the point of a sharpened pencil the wrinkle where his skin of his shoulder is meeting his back. I'm going to do the same thing for his arm right here. And I'm going to draw crosshatch lines to indicate the shadow core along the edge of his shoulder. So quite often, one of the darker areas on the shadows is just underneath, or the area where the shadow meets the light. So that's what's called the shadow core. So that's what I just laid out. So now with my brown pencil, I'm going to go ahead. Oh, actually, I think I'm going to start erasing. So no, actually, I'm not. I'm going to go ahead and go in with my brown pencil. So the light side has some very subtle shadows. So just barely, I'm going to indicate where the arm meets the forearm meets the upper arm, and the place where the upper arm is turning around and moving into the back. Just like some really fine lines to indicate those areas of shadow. And then he has this depression on his shoulder, which I'm going to indicate as well right now. And there's a shadow around the edge of this shadow core. There. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and erase my lights. So there's just a little bit of light on his bicep right here, and a little bit on the top, this top area. The light on his arms is really beautiful, and it's like snaking around the muscles and moving onto his back, which is what I'm indicating now. Okay, so now I'm going to think about his other, I'm going to darken a little bit the outside of this, because I just wanted to be really clear what it is. And now I'm going to worry about the other arm. So I think that I'm going to start with the hand. So I'm pretty happy with the way I've drawn the outline of this arm. And I'm going to modify this based on what I do with the hand. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw these clear shapes. So it's like like I said earlier, I'm going to draw the shape of the back of his hand to the knuckles. So it's like this kind of like a diamond D shape, a trapezoid. Then I'm going to draw the shape of his thumb, and I'm going to draw all of his fingers together as one single shape. So it's like my whole goal is to simplify as much as possible the hand. So I'm not like thinking about it like, oh, there's all these fingers and there are these like sausage shapes and they're coming out. What are they doing? It's like I'm thinking about it as a group of shapes that are just interlocking together like a puzzle. There. So I drew the top of the back of his hand. Now I'm going to draw the shape of his fingers. So there's a line there. I'm ignoring the fact that he has individual fingers. I'm just drawing the outside of the shape. And then I'm going to draw his thumb, which is its own shape. Coming out like that. Okay. So now so his hand is on the edge of that chair. So I'm going to draw that shape for the edge of the chair, which comes out like this. And then his lower arm is wrapping around that. So it's like quite far down. And I'm drawing this angle on the outside of that arm. Okay. So now I can think about individual fingers. So I'm going to sharpen my brown pencil again. And draw individual fingers within that. So it's like the outside finger is it's wrapping around further. So it's like I can see the point of it coming out. The other fingers are actually disappearing as they wrap around the sofa, the armchair. So now I'm going to think about, so this is good. Like this hand is looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and commit with darker lines to the edge of the hand in certain areas. I think his thumb was closer to his fingers right there. And now with the side of my pencil, I'm going to indicate shadows. So first of all, his entire the finger area is turning away from the light. So all of it is in shadow. His thumb is in shadow. And this part of it, the back of his hand, is in light. And then some of his fingers are in much deeper shadow than others. So I'm going to draw the edge of that shadow. So these two fingers, where they turn, fall into a really dark shadow. And the other two fingers fall into a shadow so deep that it's actually, I can't really tell the difference between one and the other. So there's a shadow there. And then there's a shadow that's running along the edge of the chair underneath the thumb, which I'm going to go ahead and indicate right now. Okay, so now with my black, I'm going to really commit to this. And I'm going to draw in the shadow underneath the thumb. Okay, so I'm going to kind of darken the area around his knuckles. And then with my eraser, I am going to lighten the area of the back of his hand. Okay, so that hand is done. And now everything else about that shoulder is going to be related to the hand. Okay, so I already laid out his back arm. I'm going to go ahead and I think put some yellow pastel on the chair because I want it to be quite differentiated. Actually, you know what? I take it back. I'm going to erase that and I'm going to put blue. The chair, I put yellow because the chair is yellow in the photo, but I think it's going to look more beautiful in blue because I have a red background. So I'm going to put this like kind of a blue pastel. Yeah, it's just going to look more beautiful with the brown paper. Okay, and I am going to darken this entire upper arm because it's quite dark. Where it folds around the back of the chair is where it's darkest. So I'm putting that darkening that. And like I said earlier, my cross-hatching lines, they don't just go in any random direction. They follow the edge of the body. So it's like when I do the cross-hatching, it's as if I'm drawing as if like if the model was actually here and I were to draw a line on his figure around his body, like like on the surface of his arm, it would do a circle. It would like be moving around like that. And that's the way I draw cross hatching when I draw the figure. It's like I follow what I imagine is the contour of his body, so that it's not just like any random line going in any direction. Even the lines that I'm using to indicate shadow, like are telling the viewer information about what his body is doing. Okay, so now I'm going to commit to the lines that I indicated earlier, which are about the outside of his arm. I think that they're more exaggerated than what I had originally drawn. So I'm going to do that. So as you can see, it's like that middle line is just falling away. It's moving into the background. I'm going to draw so the line of his bicep is of his shoulder is overlapping. That disappears onto the sofa. Okay, and now I'm going to draw the edge of the shadow. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and draw and indicate. I'm not planning on drawing the chair he's laying on, but I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit, at least a little bit of indication of it, so that he's not just totally flying. And I think that the shadow on that's falling down the chair from his arm is quite lovely. So I'm going to draw that shadow, and then that disappears into his shoulder. And with my blue, I'm going to indicate just a little bit of this chair that he's lying on. Actually, I think I need to erase it. Erase a little bit. It's not really working. I have another. It doesn't want to stick for some reason. Okay. So now I am going to really finish this arm. So with a black pencil, I'm going to re-emphasize the edge of that line. I'm going to come back over this dark shadow with the same black pencil, because that shadow is quite dark. I'm going to indicate a shadow core, and I'm going to darken the shadow, the cast shadow that's falling away from his figure. I'm going to put just a touch of black on the outside of his back, of his arm, and then I'm going to erase the highlights on his shoulder, on his arm. Oh, it's not, I'm not really getting it. There. There's a bright light right here, and then it moves down to there. Okay, and in this case, I think I'm going to add just a touch of white pastel. And I'm also going to add a touch on his hand. There. Okay, so his arms are finished. So now I'm going to come into his back. So okay, so before I continue on his back, I want to actually, I'm going to go ahead and finish his shoulders, and then I'm going to draw I kind of work my way out and always kind of finishing the figure as I go. So it's like, I wouldn't finish this whole thing but not work on his legs at all. I would like put a little bit of a armature for what his legs are doing before I get to the upper back. It's like I kind of like work my way out gradually. So, but I think at this point I can go ahead and put some more shadows on his back. And then I'm gonna work on the armature of his legs. His back is really beautiful. I love this pose. I thought it was super beautiful. So the shoulder is coming around. So his back is in the light side. So the shadows that are going to be back here are going to be quite subtle. And it's also important to keep in mind that so the shadow side of his body is basically there's not that much of it. It's like a little bit on the bottom of his arms right here, a little bit on the bottom of his legs, and on the outside of his legs and on his feet. The rest of this is the light side. Nothing that's on the light side should be as dark as what's over here, and nothing that's in the shadow side should be as light as what's over here. So it's like that's a common mistake that people make when they're drawing, is that they'll get so wrapped up in like what are the muscles doing on his back that they'll draw them too dark, and then they compete for attention with the actual shadows. So you need to keep in mind that the shadows that you're drawing back here have to stay on the light side. They cannot become as dark as what's going on in the dark area. Otherwise, your figure's gonna fall apart, and you won't feel the volume and the way it's like moving in space, and the back is catching all of this light. So at the moment, I'm doing the same thing as I was doing before. I'm kind of putting a little bit of a map on his back of what's going on back there. And I think at this point, I can't really work on the back anymore. I'm gonna finish the legs in terms of laying out map of what they're doing. So I feel pretty comfortable about what's going on back here. I think that this is probably a little bit lower. I think that was probably starting a little bit lower as well. And I am going to take measurements again. So the length from the middle of his butt to his leg on the outside is right there, that line. So then if I take that measurement from his, let's see, something that's already finished, I'm going to go ahead and measure from the back of his hair, and it reaches like to the first digit of his finger. So on my painting, that's going to be from, so basically the same. So that leg, wow, it's much shorter than I would have thought. It only measures up to about there. And on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. From the middle to the outside of his leg is considerably further, and that's going to measure from the outside of his hair to the end of that wrinkle on his arm. So it's going to measure about there. It's basically the same. I'm basically drawing it the same size as the original. So that's the outside leg is going to be about there. So that's like telling me information about what's going on here. So I think that I'm doing something wrong. So I'm going to measure from where his butt meets his leg muscle, that point, and see how wide that is. So that is that's basically the same length as his the fingers. So from here to here is basically from there to there, and on the other side is similar, just a little bit further. So I think the other side I drew it right. So I'm going to go ahead and using these new proportions, because I would, if left to my own devices without taking measurements, I probably would have drawn the leg about out here. But because I take all these measurements, it's like it helps me to understand like what's going on with this figure. So the butt's going to go about like that, and then for it to reach for this to do what's doing over there, it's going to go down a little bit. That's going to come. Okay, so then if I draw a line from his hip to where the butt meets the leg, this is just like a circle right there. So this is going to come down like this. I'm going to draw that in just a little bit more to make his waist even narrower. I'm going to indicate the back leg up right around there. It goes up a little bit more. The chair is right here, and the leg is right there. So that's gotten me there. That looks good. So that's gotten me this part of his leg done. So now for the other side is easier because it's less foreshortening. I'm going to draw out like this to that point. This is where his knee is. His butt comes around like this, comes out like that. If I put my pencil leaning on his legs and butt and all the way down, if you notice it's an angle, it's not straight. So I need to make sure that mine is doing the same, and it is. So I just wanted to make sure of that at this point. I'm going to draw that in. Okay, so now I'm at the point of his legs. So I'll hold this up closer to the camera so you can see. Okay, so now for his legs, I'm going to do the same thing. I take these measurements again. So um, from his knee to the tip of his toe is the same as from his elbow to the ring he's wearing. So since I'm basically drawing the same measurements, it should be about similar, and it is. So that means that from there to the tip of his toe is right around there. So that's giving me, which is where I had indicated to begin with. I've stayed pretty true to what I had thought I was going to be drawing. So I'm going to draw this leg up, going up. The foot is coming in like that. His toes are folded in. There. Okay, so that gives me the basic shape for that foot. I'm going to draw, at this point, the outside of the chair just a little bit. Like right there as well. And then I'm going to draw the other foot. So I'm going to do the same thing. From the knee to the tip of his toes, I draw a little line. And then it turns out that it's the same as to his knuckles. So that should be the same, and it is. And then from here, I draw up, and that's going to be where that foot is. So I want to keep in mind the angle of this leg. If you notice it's at an angle, I'm going to go ahead and draw this line that goes straight up. It's almost a straight line along this entire foot. The toes are going to be turning a circle. The foot is doing something kind of like that. There. So that's more or less an indication of the back leg. So at this point, now that I know what's going on back here, I can go ahead and finish his back, which is what I'm going to work on now. So I am going to start by thinking about the shadow shapes of his back. So basically, all of this is in light. However, within that light, there are like secondary shadows. So it's like this right here is like a secondary shadow. There's a secondary shadow under his butt. There's a secondary shadow here, and then right here on his back. The rest of this is essentially light. So I'm going to draw that once and for all. So, so there's a line moving around his back. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and throw that whole entire thing into shadow, which I'd already kind of done this earlier, but I'm reinforcing it even more. It continues around this. I'm drawing this line really light because these are much more delicate and sensitive shadows. Okay, and then there's this really beautiful shadow on his lower back. So it's like, I think at this point I'm going to go ahead and mark the shadow on his leg because I don't want to. What his leg is doing is affecting his back. So there's a shadow here. I'm going to throw all of this into shadow. And it wraps around and it comes in front of his butt like that. It leaves this bright highlight on the center of his back near his spinal column. And then all of this gets thrown into shadow. Okay. Now on the other side, it's going to come in just a little bit. Okay. So I think at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sharpen my pencil again, and I'm going to put some shadow on the cast shadow that his body's throwing onto the chair. So I'm pretty committed to this back. So I'm going to go ahead and outline it with black. I don't outline it with black everywhere. I only do it where, like I'm doing it here because it's turning around his body and falling into the shadow of his leg. So there and there. Okay. So if you notice, I didn't outline it in black down here because I didn't need to. It's like there's no black there. And then using the blue, I'm going to go ahead and put just a touch of blue over here. And I want to do the same thing on his other side. I'm going to really emphasize the edge of his body with the blue and not with black. Okay, so there's going to be a shadow there, so I'm not going to keep on going higher. But so now I'm going to go ahead and draw a little bit of shadow over the top, just on the very edge, where this shadow meets the shadow of his leg. And then with my pencil, my brown pencil, I don't think I'm going to really need much more black on his back. I'm going to really start indicating what these shadows are doing. The shadows on his back are just really beautiful. Okay, and I think at this point I want to start erasing lights. Okay, so this whole area on his back is in light. There's this beautiful light caught right there on his lower back. Right there, just a touch, running up his spinal column and moving out. And then there's lights that the muscles on his back are catching. It's very delicately. Okay. I'm gonna kind of blend that in just a little bit. And I'm gonna start really emphasizing the shadows with the point of my pencil. So as I said before, my lines are following what I imagine is the contour of these muscles. When, like some of these shadows, for example, it's like right here, it's because the muscle is moving in. It's like the light is catching the ridge of the higher area of the muscle, and they're all coming together in down where they join at the bone. So like that shadow, I'm going to indicate with like a curved line to indicate that it's an area that's that the muscles that are around it are moving down towards that bone. I'm going to draw some lines around here for the okay, so that back is looking pretty good. So now I'm not done with the back yet. I'm going to finish the back once I work on his butt area. So now I'm going to go ahead and really like concentrate on his legs, his upper legs, and start drawing some lines that I'm committing to the line that I'd already drawn here earlier. There. Okay, so those are pretty committed. So now I'm going to use the side of my pencil to indicate all of the shadows that are going on his legs. So I'm going to do the same thing of drawing a little line. The shadow where because his butt is sort of like pressed out and then against his back, I just think that's really beautiful. So I'm going to draw the edge of that shadow, and then I go in with the side of my pencil. I'm going to really emphasize that later. And then I'm going to do the same thing here on the shadow underneath his leg. Comes in like that. And then on the other side of his chair. Okay. And then there's a shadow that comes out and that comes up down, and then up again in the hollow of his thigh on the side of his butt. So that I'm going to really darken. All of this I'm going to really darken. Okay. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start thinking about this chair on the other side a little bit. So it starts at his shoulder, comes up to about there. The outside of the chair is right around there. Like I said, I'm not really going to draw the chair. It's just to indicate that he's on something. I don't want him to just be floating. I'm going to draw that shadow. I'm going to draw the edge of this with my black pencil because there's a black shadow underneath it. And now I'm going to really darken these lines. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do like the finishing shadows for his legs and butt. Okay, I'm going to start on this side. So I'm going to dark. This shadow is really dark. I'm going to go over that with black. Just a thin coat of black with the side of my pencil to push it back in space. And with the point of my pencil, I'm going to kind of lose a little bit the edge and indicate the shadow core. It's darker here. There's quite a dark hollow on the side of his hip. And I'm going to darken the rest of this side of his body with my brown pencil. And like I said, I'm still moving. The direction of my line follows the contour of his leg. Okay, so now I'm going to erase. Actually, I think that I need to put a little bit of shadow running around his butt like that, just a little bit. Ah. And now I'm going to erase. So this area is quite light. There's a touch of light here. The light here is stronger, and I drew it too high up earlier, so I'm going to push that back. And then I'm going to erase out a touch of light right there and the other side of his hip. And moving into the back leg like that. Okay, so now I'm going to really emphasize this shadow that's going on right here. And I'm going to do the same thing for the shadows on the side. And I'm going to put just a touch of black where the leg is turning and meeting the shadow that's cast onto the chair. And there's just a touch of a really dark shadow underneath his leg on the other side. Okay, so now I'm ready to move on to his lower legs. So I'm going to start with this one. I already laid it out, so it's like, it's all laid out for me, and I'm really coming close to finishing this drawing. And okay, so first thing I'm going to do is start really thinking about committing to the lines that I've drawn around the edge. So I'm going to sharpen my pencil again. Usually when I do these like kind of committed lines, I want my pencil to be sharp because I want to have like a crisp line. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I drew this too wide. So I'm going to make his calf just a little bit thinner. Come in. There's a muscle there. Comes in like this. I think I drew too wide, his foot too wide, so I'm going to narrow that. At this point, I could be taking measurements too. It's like you could take measurements the entire time if you're anytime you're unsure. I'm not so unsure that I feel like I need to take measurements. It looks pretty good to me. But it's like what I had originally drawn definitely did feel a little bit too wide. But that original drawing wasn't meant to be finished. It was just meant to be like a map to like kind of indicate more or less what was going to be going on later. So now I'm going to start thinking about the shadows that are being cast across this leg. So there's a dark shadow that runs along the bottom of the leg. That's quite dark. And then the rest of the leg is basically light. There's just these like subtle shadows following the edge of his calf. Where the leg turns around, there's a little bit of a shadow on his ankle. There's a little bit of a shadow around there. Okay, and now I'm going to come in with my eraser and erase out these lights. Okay, and with my black pencil, I'm going to indicate these darker shadows that are around the edge. As well as the shadow that's underneath his foot. Okay, and now I'm going to do the other leg. So it's exactly the same process. It's like I'm going to draw where the leg is turning around. So it's going to run into this point on his ankle, which is just below. It's like at the same point. If I draw a line out, it's on the same line as his heel. So that means that the thinnest part of his ankle is above that, which is going to be right there. Come in like this. This leg is going to come in. This comes. This is a little bit of a bump. Okay. In this case, I think it's going to help me to draw that shadow now. Comes around like that. I'm going to throw that in. It's helping me to understand what's going on with the back. This foot's just a little bit harder to draw. It's like a little bit, it's like twisting in space in two angles at the same time. But I'm still basically doing the same thing. So it's like I drew this shape right here. I'm going to draw this shape right there. Comes to a point. This comes like that. And then his toes are angling underneath. So my photo's not very good, and I can't really tell what his toes are doing exactly. But that looks pretty good. Okay, and now I'm going to come around the bottom and throw this in shadow. So, and now I'm going to think about the shadows. So it's a dark shadow coming onto here. I can see the line of the edge of his calf. All of this is in super dark shadow. It comes around his back like that. This whole area is in shadow. Okay, and now I'm going to come in with my black pencil and really finish that. And I'm going to be done with this drawing in like 3 minutes. So I'm going to really emphasize the darkness of the shadow right here, because this leg is like twisting away and into the dark, whereas the other leg is twisting. It's twisting towards you and into the light. So there's a lot of light on the other leg. This leg, I'm going to put just a touch of erased light onto it. It doesn't really have that much. Okay, and forward. to emphasize some of the musculature that's going on here. So this putting on the final touches now. And a little bit on his butt. There, that's looking pretty good. So I think that this drawing is just about done. So here it is. So here's the original and the finished drawing. So so thank you very much, and I'll be back next week, if not earlier. Goodbye.